consciousness is magic in itself. But to adopt the egocentric frame of reference means you have sacrificed your magic. Your magic powers lie in that consciousness which is beyond the scope of the ego. Sat Yoga is the work of overcoming the illusion of the ego. Those who reflect upon their suffering and are clearly able to see that it consists of projections from an egocentric basis and frame of reference, come to perceive clearly that the ego is the source of all pain, of all suffering, of all negativity, of all psychosomatic symptoms of illness. The difficulty in overcoming the egocentric frame of reference is that we try to do it from within the egocentric frame of reference. And if you take as a premise that there is an ego trying to think its way out of a box, you have created the very box that you have now thought yourself into. And therefore, the problem cannot be resolved through thought, but only through the transcendence of thought. Once the consciousness has settled into an interest in discovering what itself is, really is, not what its role in society is as a body, and how it is perceived, whether young or old, male or female, attractive or unattractive, or etc., etc. Not all of those things that have to do with egocentric thinking, but what is it in which the ego has taken root and which has become a weed within the garden of consciousness. To understand that, we must understand what consciousness itself is. And it is this that meditation reveals through an awakened recognition that consciousness is far more than simply the mind as it is known by the ego. And that in fact, consciousness extends infinitely beyond the tiny bubble within this ocean of consciousness that is the real, that is identified as an ego. And so one can choose to live as this tiny temporary bubble hurtling through time and space on a wave that is not understood within an ocean that is not even recognized. Or one can pop the bubble voluntarily and realize one's true self as that ocean of infinite, limitless intelligence, power, and joy. But the choice to not lead a limited life of an ego cannot be made by the ego. This is the catch-22, isn't it? Because the ego mind cannot even imagine being without its usual functions of chatter and desire and sensory enjoyment and a mode of operation in which one tries to accumulate positive strokes from the other. And it is this psychic economy of the ego that one doesn't want to withdraw from. And so the only way around this catch is to burrow so deeply within the ego that one comes out the other side, into that emptiness, prior to the formation of ego, to discover what pure consciousness is, undisturbed by the storms that happen at the surface of the ocean, within the bubble. In the depths of the ocean, there is no movement, there is no agitation, there is no conflict. And the deeper one goes, the more peace and the more of all of the powers and virtues of real pure consciousness become revealed. But the cost of diving deep is that one must shed those superficial elements of the body-mind that will pull one back to the surface. And one must be willing to let go of that sense of individual selfhood that has been the very thing that propelled one forward in life. To discover that it was an illusion and that selfhood really means something entirely different. Entirely unknowable within the ego delusion. But that liberation from the delusion of the individual self enables the cosmic self, the divine self, the supreme self to be revealed and to be the one who functions through the body-mind and through the universe as a whole without conflict. Without suffering. To the ego, the letting go of its mental chatter feels like a sacrifice. And yet, when there is that grace of a moment of peace and silence, one recognizes that this alone is life-giving, life-sustaining. And this inner silence and peace alone allows growth and allows the capacity for consciousness to reorganize itself into a true self-awareness at the scale of the absolute, not of the miniature ego. And it is this shift in scale from the microcosm to the macrocosm that brings consciousness truly to life in its recognition that all there is consciousness. All we all are bubbles on a wave of consciousness as individual selves. But there is only one consciousness moving all of us on this wave within this ocean, and that is the ocean itself. And so when the raindrop falls into the ocean, it can never be retrieved. It is made of the same stuff. And the only stuff that everything is made of is consciousness. It's an infinitely malleable substance that is no substance at all. It can do anything. It's absolutely limitless. That's why the alchemists called it the philosopher's stone. It's magical. Consciousness is magic in itself. But to adopt the egocentric frame of reference means you have sacrificed your magic. Your magic powers lie in that consciousness which is beyond the scope of the ego. And so you can live a humdrum life that's very reasonable and probably deal with most of the forms of agony and suffering and barely muddle through and endure within that egoic frame of reference. But why miss out on the magic, on the miraculous, on the astonishing capacity of consciousness to transform the world, which is its own manifestation? Why be only a passive victim of a power so far greater than the ego that the only way to manage the forces of destiny is to become that one who harnesses those forces, not the one who is moved by it? Who sets the waves in motion that cause the bubbles to crash against the beach? It is that power that you really are. Why sacrifice that for a life as an ego whose fate is to die on a beach, having been bereft of all that you thought you were, until that moment where you pop back into the sands of time? The ego is a temporary phenomenon. It has no reality. It's a statue, an image, an object without life, without truth. Whereas who you really are is eternal and immortal and infinitely intelligent and loving and pure and beautiful. Why sacrifice all that by believing in the ego delusion, when simply through the sacrifice of that delusion you gain everything? Infinity, eternity, and absolute beauty, power, joy, all the things you are looking for within the ego and can never get is there waiting for you if you'll just pop that bubble of delusion. Today is a day set aside for reflection upon this question. You can live in your true self and have a blissful, fulfilling life of wisdom and power, and union with the supreme undescribable self who rules the universe, and realize you are that, or you can lead a life of suffering within a frame of reference that you yourself know is false and is simply projections of your own unhappiness for having betrayed yourself. That becomes anger at everybody else. Which kind of life do you want? No one can force you to choose the life of a liberated being, and no one can stop you. You have the power, but the power comes from realizing the powerlessness of the ego and allowing that illusion to dissolve. Allowing the bubble to pop. So that the infinite self, the oceanic, eternal, unlimited Buddha nature, the Tao, Allah, the Ein Sof, all of the terms that every culture has offered to tell us what we really are and to encourage us to love that and go for it. All are in harmony, in unison, sending the same message to us. Be free, be the infinite, realize the true nature of your God self. Every religion, every sage, every saint, every liberated being calls out the same message to us. Why do we not have ears to hear? Why do we refuse to come out of the petty into the great? Today is a day to reflect and to choose whether you will pass over the ego, cross through the Red Sea and into the Promised Land, climb the mountain of God and receive a new set of commandments, and conquer the dark forces that have taken over that paradise that belongs to you, and recognize those dark forces only as your own resistance to infinite love. May you reflect deeply, not from within the ego, but from that silence of the heart, and recognize that the freedom that you are considering granting yourself already belongs to you. One does not really have to struggle against anything to receive these blessings except one's own rejection of them. There is no enemy but your own failure to release yourself from a self-created bondage that has no purpose, no validity, and no reality. May you all have the wisdom to choose freedom and heal yourself with the truth of who you are.